don't
So I
appreciate the pause.
apologize on behalf of some of the jerks we have in this town, and please don't hold it against all of us.
I don't, if I may,
Please.
just a quick statement about this. First of all, I don't hold it against anybody. I was infuriated when this came up. It was nothing but a blatant lie by a liar, John D'Italia. And I will guarantee you one thing, Mr. D'Italia and anyone involved in Mr. D'Italia will be pursued vigorously by me through the United States Justice Department if I can get them involved in this, as well as through civil matters. One thing I take very serious is my reputation, the job I do, and I will not stand by a person like him making those kind of comments for whatever the reason he made them were. And we will get to the root of it. So no apology necessary. It's part of the job. Thank you.
Report of Town Council. I've asked Town Council to give us report. Attorney Richard Bowen, who's Chief Counsel at Koppelman and Page, to update the board on his investigation, which this body, myself, had asked for, with regards to racial complaint made against Police Chief Richard Stanley.
Excuse me, Mr. Andrews, do you have copies of your report?
Yes.
Aha. I mean, the your whole report.
Oh, the whole report?
There were no
Thank you very much,
copies
sir.
of the report in our packets this week, and Mr. Cruz is informing me that they were not in the
Madam Chair, I apologize.
in the box.
Yeah, we can. Where's John?
I'm sure it was just an oversight on the part of the staff. Unless they're in the box. Selectman's office? Oops. Carrie, you should have looked.
Madam Chair, I apologize for that.
No problem.
Just fine. We just need 5 copies.
Well, while we're waiting, why don't we continue to with the first item on the agenda?
Yes, Madam Chair. Attorney Richard Bowen from the firm of Koppel and Page. Rich.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Administrator. Madam Chairman, members of the board, thank you for giving me the opportunity to appear in front of you. I have just handed you a copy of an investigative report that I performed at your request. Madam Chair has the original. I've provided the chief with a copy, and with your permission, I will read the report.
The entire report?
It's brief, and I'll
Okay.
read quickly.
All right. Thank you.
Introduction. The Board of Selectmen and the Town Administrator ordered an investigation into an allegation presented by Attorney Patricia McCardle and Mr. John D'Italia. The substance of the allegation is as follows. A letter from Ms. McCardle dated March 30th, 2010 and attached hereto as Exhibit A accused Police Chief Richard Stanley of bigoted acts and of using the word nigger in conjunction with an arrest of a person of color that occurred at the White Pines Motel on January 8th, 2010. At this point, I would like to state for the record that the use of this word is deplorable, and I am using it in connection with this report because it came out of the allegations that were made against Mr. Stanley. I use the word with the greatest distaste, but it is necessary for me to use the word in connection with the investigation and the conclusions. So my apologies. A copy, Ms. McCardle attached to her letter a handwritten statement purportedly written and signed by John D'Italia in which he recites an account of events of January 8, 2010 and Stanley's alleged use of the word nigger. A copy of the D'Italia statement and a transcription prepared by Ms. McCardle are attached hereto as Exhibit B. The gravamen of the complaint is that Stanley ordered the removal of the arrestee from the scene with the words, "Get that nigger out of here." Both the Board of Selectmen and Town Administrator made it the touchstone of this investigation that racist behavior of any sort is intolerable and that this investigation was to be pursued with the utmost seriousness. As to the investigation, I commenced the investigation by speaking with Ms. McCardle on April 14, 2010 by telephone. She informed me that she had no contact with Mr. D'Italia, the author of the statement, did not represent him, and had never spoken to him. Ms. McCardle stated that the handwritten statement which was given to her by a person whom she did not identify, and that she had no knowledge of the event. I've attached a copy of her letter and the statement to this report. After several attempts, I was able to arrange an interview with Mr. D'Italia. My colleague David Jenkins and I met with Mr. D'Italia at the law office of Jonathan M. Graham and Associates in the presence of his two attorneys. We presented Mr. D'Italia with a copy of his statement and questioned him on it and his recollection of the events of January 8, 2010. It became apparent that there were serious discrepancies between Mr. D'Italia's recollection and the details of his written statement. Mr. D'Italia was unable to identify the date on which Stanley allegedly used the word nigger. It was Mr. D'Italia's recollection that the event he described had occurred in February or March. Mr. D'Italia disavowed that part of his statement, which reads, "I looked over and the girl whom was in the room with Spunky was in a chair naked in the hall." Mr. D'Italia stated that the young woman, who I've referred to as Jane Doe for reasons of privacy, was in fact not naked, and that the written statement was wrong. On May 14, 2010, I spoke with Jane Doe by telephone in the company of Detective De Silva and reviewed an audio interview of the woman taken by Detective Silva subsequent to the events that gave rise to this allegation. Ms. Doe stated that at no point was she naked and that she was treated with respect by the Wareham police, and at no time did she hear racist language. In a series of interviews, I spoke with the town administrator concerning the D'Italia statement's claim that, quote, "I then went to the town administrator, whom did call me, and asked if I got any more problems or complaints, please call him direct," unquote. Since it might be inferred that Mr. D'Italia spoke to the town administrator about Stanley's alleged racist conduct, and since Ms. McCardle's March 30, 2010 letter accuses Stanley of, quote, "discriminatory and bigoted acts," unquote, and purports to put the town administrator on notice of such actions, I questioned him repeatedly about what, if anything, Mr. D'Italia said to him. The town administrator consistently stated that Mr. D'Italia never spoke of any impropriety or racist conduct and sought only to enlist the town administrator's assistance in smoothing the permitting of Mr. D'Italia's renovation of the White Pines Motel property. Subsequently, I separately interviewed Detective Sergeant Jacinto, Detective Corchain, Detective De Silva, Detective Smith, and Investigator John Gerard. Each officer testified consistently and as pertinent to this investigation as follows. The police officials, in executing a search warrant, took into custody an individual, nicknamed Spunky, and I've used his nickname throughout out of a concern for his privacy, took into custody an individual, Spunky, who was arrested for various felonious offenses, for which he is now serving a term of imprisonment. Again, I've adopted his nickname for privacy reasons, and Spunky has not complained of any racist treatment. According to the police dispatch logs and the statements of the officers, Spunky was removed from the scene shortly after the arrest. Chief Stanley, who was not a party to the arrest, arrived at the White Pines Motel to assist in evidence gathering after Spunky had been transported from the locus. Each officer testified that at no time were Stanley and Spunky present together, and at no time did Stanley utter the word nigger or yell or otherwise state, "Get that nigger out of here." The officers also testified that Jane Doe was Spunky's girlfriend and that she was clothed at all times that they were present. In response to an invitation from Mr. D'Italia given at his interview, I visited the White Pines Motel on May 14, 2010 in the company of Detective De Silva in order to better understand the physical layout of the facility. Mr. D'Italia was present, and other than to exchange pleasantries and to thank him for the invitation, I did not speak with him. This is because he was represented by counsel at the time of the interview. While I examined the premises, I observed Detective De Silva, Mr. D'Italia, and a gentleman later identified as Von Wedge in a discussion. Detective De Silva informed me as we departed that, in the presence of Mr. Wedge, Mr. D'Italia stated that he had not written the statement that launched the investigation, that it was written by another, and that he wished to have no further part in the matter. Detective De Silva, at my request, later contacted Mr. Wedge to ask if he would be willing to make a statement concerning what he heard. Detective De Silva reported to me that while Mr. Wedge confirmed the detective's recollection of Mr. D'Italia's remarks, Mr. Wedge was unwilling to participate in the investigation. Detective De Silva wrote down his recollection of the statements, and that document is attached hereto as Exhibit C. At my request, town officials began to gather specimens of Mr. D'Italia's writing from various permit applications so that I could arrange for a forensic examination of the statement to ascertain authorship. That further step became unnecessary when on May 20th, 2010, Mr. D'Italia contacted the town administrator asking to speak with me about withdrawing his accusation. I explained to the town administrator that I would be happy to speak with Mr. D'Italia, but that as he was represented by counsel, I would not do so without his attorney being present. Subsequently, on May 24th, 2010, I received an email communication from Mr. D'Italia stating that he was not represented by counsel in this matter. A copy of this communication is attached hereto as Exhibit D. Thereupon, on May 27, 2010, I interviewed Mr. D'Italia by telephone. He informed me that the statement containing the allegation of racism was composed by another person, whom he did not identify. He stated that he was, quote, tired of being used as someone else's tool, unquote, and that this had to stop. He stated that, quote, it got out of hand, unquote, and apologized for any harm caused to Stanley. He stated that he had heard very good things about Stanley and that police department professionalism and morale were on the upswing. I asked Mr. D'Italia if he would be willing to make another written statement, and he sent me an email stating that he was retracting his previous statement of racist conduct. A copy of Mr. D'Italia's retraction is attached as Exhibit E. Members of the board, these are my findings. The allegations made by Ms. McCardle and Mr. D'Italia are wholly without foundation. Ms. McCardle's March 30th, 2010 letter was written without any personal knowledge of the events and, in essence, is a republication of the account made by the statement's author. I am unable to conclude who authored the statement, although it may be inferred from Mr. D'Italia's retraction and comments that he may have been the scrivener of an account composed by another. For purposes of this investigation, authorship is unimportant. Mr. D'Italia now withdraws his accusation that Stanley used the word nigger. Mr. D'Italia's withdrawal squares with the testimony of the officers that Stanley was not at the White Pines Motel at the same time as the arrestee. As a matter of timing, Stanley could not have told anyone to get the arrestee, parenthesis, out of here, as that person had already been removed for booking. I have considered the question of whether Mr. D'Italia may have been the subject of undue influence causing him to retract his statement. I reject that possibility. At his initial interview, Mr. D'Italia's knowledge of an allegation as serious as the one raised by the statement was deficient. He was unable to correctly identify the month in which the event had occurred, never mind the actual date. Further, he admitted that the statement was inaccurate in the significant aspect of Ms. Doe's supposed quote-unquote nakedness. Thus, even before he dropped his claim, he had impeached the credibility of the statement and demonstrated a dubious knowledge of the events supposed to have occurred. Moreover, I draw a negative inference, I believe this says reference, it should say inference, on the statement's credibility due to its timing. Mr. D'Italia did not inform the town administrator at the time the remarks are alleged to have occurred. The statement containing the allegations was dated and submitted 2.5 months later. This delay was unreasonable in relation to the shocking nature of the allegations and calls them into question. The complainant, Mr. D'Italia, has withdrawn his allegation. There is no witness that corroborates any claim of racist or inappropriate behavior by Stanley. Thus, Ms. McCardle and Mr. D'Italia's accusations are unsubstantiated and by Mr. D'Italia's own words and actions proven false. I recommend that the Board of Selectmen adopt these conclusions and exonerate Stanley. Submitted by Richard Bowen, Esquire, Investigator. I have numerous additional copies for distribution.
Does any member of the board have any questions for Mr. Bowen? Ms. Winslow? Do you have a question? No? Mr. Holmes?
Are you gonna, oh, okay.
Yeah. Madam Chair, I'm not sure what you're asking, whether, are you looking for a motion on this before comments are made, or are you looking for comments
No, I
at this
was looking
moment?
for comments or questions first. Mrs. Ekstrom, did you have a comment or a question?
I have a couple. Attorney Bowen,
Ma'am.
from this allegation and this, was there a crime that was committed by the complainant, in your opinion?
Ma'am, I wouldn't want to comment on that solely because when I went into this investigation, I set about it with the purpose of discovering whether a very serious offense against our community had been made, and I pursued that particular offense. It's possible that there may be some collateral fallout from this matter, but at this point I'd be reluctant to comment whether they were criminal or civil in nature.
And if there was something, or if the board were so inclined to pursue this further, if we have someone's making an allegation, an outrageous allegation, in an attempt, in my opinion, to try to destroy someone's character because that person has done more in the past 9 months than other people did in 20 years, and solely for that reason, would we have a right, is there a possibility that we could pursue that, and as far as the gentleman who didn't want to give a statement, under a subpoena or deposition, whatever, compel him to testify to something like that?
Well, ma'am, under Chapter 233, I believe it's Section 8 or 8A, the board does have subpoena power in pursuance of investigation of matters within its jurisdiction. However, at this point, I suspect that if there were further causes of action that arose from the complaint, they would probably be of a private civil nature and would have to be pursued by Chief Stanley in his personal capacity as opposed to the Board of Selectmen in an official capacity.
Okay, and all right, on that same idea, we're also speaking about, you are an officer of the court.
Yes, ma'am.
The person who received this allegation and was also an officer of the court.
Yes, ma'am.
And there were also some, my understanding, if I remember correctly, that they didn't know who gave it to them, had no knowledge of any of that. If Mr. D'Italia says that he was not represented, that he was not represented by counsel, then if it had been Mr. D'Italia, would that not fall under not being attorney-client privilege, unless, of course, it was an attorney, a client that perhaps gave it to her? That's why she would not be able to identify who actually handed it to her?
I could speculate as to any number of reasons why that individual chose not to identify the person who gave it to her. She was not at that point willing to tell me who gave it to her, and at that point that was a lead I could no longer pursue.
Thank you. And just on a side note, Chief Stanley, by chance you're here for another issue. On behalf of this town, I apologize that we have jerks in our town that would do something like this to get their own personal agendas pushed forward. You have done nothing in this town except for make this town a better place. Make these officers stand with their heads high. Make these people in this community happy to see them, waving to them. And I think that you have done wonders. And so...
It's not that I don't appreciate
I
the applause.
apologize on behalf of some of the jerks we have in this town, and please don't hold it against all of us.
I don't, if I may, Madam Chair.
Please.
Just a quick statement about this. First of all, I don't hold it against anybody. I was infuriated when this came up. It was nothing but a blatant lie by a liar, John D'Italia. And I will guarantee you one thing. Mr. D'Italia, and anyone involved in Mr. D'Italia, will be pursued vigorously by me through the United States Justice Department, if I can get them involved in this, as well as through civil matters. One thing I take very serious is my reputation, the job I do, and I will not stand by a person like him making those kind of comments for whatever the reason he made them were. And we will get to the root of it. So no apology necessary. It's part of the job. Thank you.
Thank you.
Would anybody else like to comment? Mr. Andrews?
Madam Chair, just for the record, I want to make it clear, it is my legal responsibility to pursue this investigation, to have engaged Chief Attorney to take on this matter, and I feel the same way as Member Ekstrom feels. Working with a professional like Rick Stanley has been a pleasure for the time that I have been here. I look forward to many, many more years of service, and I think the important part here is that this matter has been completely investigated outside of the administration for the purpose of clearing up this matter, and I just want to make sure that, once again, it's a matter of record, that it was a matter of law. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Andrews. Mr. Bowen, I have one comment and one concern. And I think by way of explanation to the community, you have an exhibit in your investigation from another attorney. And the other attorney, in my opinion, was threatening this board with this letter. And I think that's where Mrs. Ekstrom was coming from. There's no issue with us discussing that particular letter and that particular attorney, is there?
No, ma'am.
No, and I feel that this attorney was trying to blackmail this board with this letter. She brought it forward in conjunction with another case, and with no real proof. And obviously, now that we have Mr. D'Italia's retraction, I'm feeling that it might be there's potential for us to pursue action against this attorney. And I would like to have your advice on that at a later date. I think that it's just absolutely so unethical of this attorney to have brought this up to this board, to have the audacity to bring this kind of a claim, allegation, against our police chief and imply that this board would somehow be collaborating with a discriminatory person if we were to hire this chief. And that is the accusation that was made by this attorney. And I would like to know what your thoughts are on that.
Well,
Unless it would be unwise for us to do that, we can pursue it in executive session if that's necessary.
well, with your permission, Madam Chairman, I felt it was necessary to include that March 30th letter in this packet because it is an integral part of the allegations. I had an allegation from two people, from Attorney McCardle and from Mr. D'Italia, and each made essentially the same allegation, although one elaborated on it somewhat, the letter from Ms. McCardle. So it was my obligation to treat this as a complaint that had to be investigated with all seriousness. The very first person I talked to in this case was Ms. McCardle, and the substance of her comments are reported in this document.
Thank you, Mr. Bowen. And I'd also, so I'd just like to, finish up by saying that it's very unfortunate in this day and age that in any community that we have to have issues like this brought up to the detriment of our department heads, people who work, whether it's the police chief or anybody else. I just am so ashamed and embarrassed for our community that we have people out there who would go to the lengths that they did to try to discredit the chief and then recant it. It really is a shame. And I just hope that people will stop and think about what it is that they're doing and how they can harm both people's reputations as Chief Stanley and embarrass their community by doing things like this. And I deeply regret that this whole situation happened, and I too apologize to Chief Stanley and to the people of this town that we have others who, if you know people like this, you need to talk to them. They seriously need some help. This is very, very, very sad day in the history of Wareham.
Madam Chair,
Yes,
before
go ahead,
you
Mr.
move on,
Holmes.
I have two comments. First, well, three comments. First, Attorney Bowen, thank you for your efforts.
Thank you.
And I think you've clearly come back to the board with what was asked of you. Comment number two is this document that we look at with the exhibits. Is this a public document now that you've presented it back to this board?
Yes, sir.
Then I might, at the proper moment, make a motion to redact some of these names in here. Yeah, we have some other people that are not actually part of the issue with the chief. There are personal emails in here I think that we should probably look at taking out. We can get to that when we get to it. But more importantly, this thing from day one has made me sick, quite frankly. Whether it was the chief and I have spoken, he knows how I feel about him. But I take a beating I've taken the beating about this almost every day when I go for breakfast, and some of you know where I eat. And in today's day and age, to have a professional, this whole race thing just sickens me to death anyway. Whether it's from the newspaper playing games, or reporters playing games, or people playing games, this issue has to go to bed. And I know that we can't do it ourselves. But if each one of us looks in the damn mirror and says, you know what, I'm not going to get into this in my life, this would be a better place. Whether it's Chief Stanley or one of his detectives or the guy walking down the street, and this racial thing comes in, it just makes me sick, quite frankly. And I don't believe that we should ever do that. And it's hard for us to, like the chief says, none of us accused him of that. Nobody in this room did that. Yeah, but there are sick people out there who play these kinds of games. And it's not fair to the chief. It's not fair to this board. I don't care about the board. It's just not fair to use race to try to cut somebody off at the knees. It's just not right. And I'm not going to stand for that. And, the chief's a big boy. He can defend himself. He's got guns on his hip there, too. He brought about 6 guns with him tonight, I think. But, no, it's not funny. And I don't mean to joke about the gun chief, you know that. But race makes me sick. Whether you're white, brown, whatever, listen, we all live in this community together. We're trying to form a community here of everybody working in the same. And and that race stuff sucks, and it shouldn't take place in this town.
Thank you, Mr.
And we should
Holmes.
just try to work to clear the field of these people who want to do that.
Absolutely.
So, thank you,
Cruz.
and thank the chief, and Madam Chairperson, thank you for
Yeah,
allowing my
Attorney
comments.
Rich Bowen, I want to compliment you on the work you've done,
Thank you.
because you showed the town where we stand, where we're going, where we're headed. Nothing will be hidden. Everything is open. And if you're doing wrong, we're going to find out about it, and that's the way it should be. Thank you very much. I compliment you and the chief. Thank you
Thanks.
for doing a good job.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Ms. Winslow.
just briefly, because I don't want to. I just have a couple of questions. First of all, I'll start by saying that, and I've said it publicly a number of times, this issue of race has no place in the community. It's unhealthy, and it's hurtful and harmful no matter which side of it you're on, whether you're the one doing it or whether you're the one it's being done to. Now I just want to get into the procedural questions that I have, because as you know, this incident occurred prior to me sitting on this board, so I don't know, I don't have all the back details. I know I spoke with the chief about it, and the chief assured me that this would be the report that we have here tonight. But procedurally, in terms of what Mr. Holmes said, the redaction, there are names that the town may or may not potentially have or future litigation with, those names should be redacted from the public document, correct? And the email addresses?
Absolutely not. Absolutely not.
With your permission, Madam Chairman,
Please.
when I prepared this document, other than in some obvious cases where the name of the person was not material, for example, the young lady or the gentleman who was arrested, no one needed to know their names in order for the board to come to an understanding of what happened, which is why I used pseudonyms for them. But as to the other names and the other addresses, each of those names was important so that you could understand the investigative process. And it's my view, anyway, that as part of the investigative process, those names had to be in front of you and need not be redacted. Each of the persons who is named in here made statements, and if at some future date they become accountable for their statements, either publicly or privately, so be it. The only thing a person in life has control of are the words that comes out of his or her mouth.
Attorney Bowen,
Yes,
if I may, in the attorney's letter that came to the board prior to me being elected, so this is the first time that I've seen the letter, it names two individuals by name.
I now understand what you're asking.
I was?
Yes, because we talked about it the very first night you were here.
You were sick.
I'd
you
left.
left.
Yes,
It was the night
I
you
left.
left.
Yes, so
Sorry.
I hadn't seen this
It was
prior.
in your packet, though.
I must have missed it. But anyways, my concern is that those two individuals have nothing to do with this investigation. They weren't part of this investigation.
I agree with you there. Their names are in this investigative document only because the attorney who was representing them chose to put those names in there. I have not investigated either of those individuals. I have no opinion about what, if any, involvement they have. There was nothing for me to pursue there. If you wished to redact their names from this, I suppose you could. The document itself is probably a public record at this point anyway.
That's what, yeah.
And if I could, I don't mean to interrupt, but that was where my question was directed earlier, as to that particular document and the way that that attorney linked this letter and this allegation that has proven to be totally baseless and groundless to the other case is where I was coming from in terms of that her intent was clearly to try to intimidate the board. And I'm not sure that we should take that up in executive session as potential litigation against this attorney. That was my question. Perhaps I didn't state it well initially, Mr. Bowen.
My concern is that the other individuals are represented by this attorney and possibly in another litigation matter, and whether or not that, because there could be or is litigation, that information wouldn't be public as of yet because it wouldn't be resolved, correct?
But if I may, if you're represented by counsel, someone who's represented by counsel, that's a record that they're represented by counsel. She makes no assertions or allegations that these people had any. She's making the link, but there's no. It doesn't say that this person or that person. And if you want to put a black line through this, fine. But anyone that wants it can go right over to town hall and get a copy of this because it is a public record. So I think it's kind of a moot point.
Okay, well, I just want it on the record that I object to those names being distributed to the public either through town hall or through this pamphlet, because I think that that's going to cause us problems in the future.
Sure. And I understand your objection, Ms. Winslow, but I think that it's already public knowledge that these two gentlemen are involved in a lawsuit. It was in onset. This whole thing was in onset and talked about in onset before we ever even received the letters. So the individuals who perpetrated this issue were not keeping their mouths closed. I was in the same establishment that Mr. Holmes eats breakfast in 3 weeks before we got this letter, and it was already the talk of onset, so everybody knows about it. It's not even a matter of it being a public document. It was well-known and well-rumored well before any piece of paper ever hit the desk or the mailbox at Town Hall. And again, that's just another reason for us to be very unhappy with the despicable nature of this entire situation. It's very sad, and it is unfortunate, but everybody already knows about the individuals that are named in this letter, and as I said, it was already public knowledge before anything ever hit the desk or the mailbox at Wareham Town Hall.
Madam Chair,
Yes, Mr. Holmes, please.
as you've said to me in the past, it matters not what the public already knows. It's what we take for an action in this matter.
that?
Yeah. Even though,
That's a good saying.
even though we have a discussion in private or an executive session, even though it's rumors on the street, we can't go out and talk about that. And so while I agree with you that this is despicable, I don't know that these two gentlemen, or three gentlemen in this letter, because an attorney put their name in here, I don't need to, do we need to be blasting these people all over the papers as perpetrators? I didn't
No, I
hear
don't
that
think anybody
rumor
wants to
that-
blast them as perpetrators, and I think that they would have an issue
They'd
with
have
their
an
own
issue
attorney.
Right, with
All right,
his-
they have an
their
attorney issue, but because if the attorney put my name in there, I'd be pretty upset. I got nothing to do with this allegation against the chief, other than the fact that I've done business in her office.
Mr.
And if I
Bowen,
had, maybe
Attorney
she would have
Bowen,
put my name in there.
would you like to address it?
Madam Chairman, a couple of things. One, I have not commented on either of those two individuals anywhere in this report. Their names are in an attachment solely because their attorney chose to put their names in a document which alleged that Chief Stanley used a racist word against a third party. If you wish to redact those two names, that's your choice. I agree with your analysis of the law that the fact that something is well rumored does not automatically mean that it's become a public record. That being said, I suspect that a letter of this sort was probably a public record the second that you got it. However, if it provides the board with a level of comfort, I certainly have no objection to you crossing those two names out of this document or any other document before it's distributed. My suspicion is that that act will be appealed to the supervisor of public records, and the supervisor will tell you to issue the unredacted letter. But, you know, that's, again, it's a process and it's a choice.
Okay.
Is there anything else to be said on the matter?
So then, just to clarify, it's your advice as town council to leave this just the way it is and send it out.
It's my opinion that when the document was sent to the Board of Selectmen and to the town administrator, it was a public record. It was not a document in litigation. It referred to a matter that was the subject of a pending claim in a passing way, but that the substance of the letter dealt with the allegation that the chief used a racist word in connection with the arrest of a person of color.
And that's where I feel that the letter itself, particularly the sentence that says, if you make Richard Stanley the permanent full-time chief of the town of Wareham, you are knowing participants in this discriminatory and prejudicial scheme of the chief, and you will be held accountable for acts in front of the MCAD and a federal jury. That's what I'm talking about, where I feel like the attorney, we may want to discuss taking some action against the attorney in executive session, if that's the appropriate place to do so. Okay, if we have nothing, did you have another question? If we have no further discussion on this, I'd like to thank you again, Attorney Bowen, and again apologize to the chief. Obviously, we have 585 people who feel very differently about the chief. And
Madam Chairman, if I may, could I make a motion for the Board of Selectmen to adopt these conclusions and to exonerate Chief Stanley
is there a second?
Exonerate him from what?
from the allegations?
What?
As the conclusion
I think it goes back to
Oh,
the
wait.
question you asked initially, Mr. Holmes. Do we want a motion to
there
exonerate the
we go.
chief?
To adopt these conclusions.
I'll
and
second that
exonerate.
motion.
Thank you.
I thought you might. Thank you. We have a motion and a second to adopt the conclusions of the investigation and to exonerate Chief Stanley of all these allegations. All in favor?
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Abstain? It's 5-0-0. You are officially exonerated by the board, Chief Stanley. Thank you.